Good evening, everyone. My name is Lucy Handley. I work at the Ridgefield Library. I do the adult programs. Sorry, I'm admitting people. Um, and it is my pleasure tonight to introduce Ben Grannis, who came to the library and proposed this idea for a program, which was really interesting. He was riding across on his bicycle the country on a jillion-mile journey to raise awareness for a very special cause. So I'm going to let him explain that all. Welcome, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy, and thank you everyone for being here. This is so different than I was expecting. Obviously, it's on Zoom, and I'm really glad actually that Lucy was able to set this up and that so many folks who may not have been able to attend in person in Ridgefield are now able to. So thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedules to be with me and to share some stories about my experience so far and also to learn a bit more about why I'm doing what I'm doing. So we'll get right into it. So just a little bit of background on myself. My name is Ben Grannis. I'm 26. I'm from Ridgefield, Connecticut, and graduated from Ridgefield High School in 2013 and graduated from Kenyon College in Ohio in 2017. For the past few years, I've been working for a summer camp company called Overland Summers, based in northwestern Massachusetts, as a trip planner. And a big reason why I'm doing what I'm doing is because of my experience working for that company. And well, I'll touch on that a bit later. I'm at my parents' house now. Thank you, Dad, for letting me use your great studio space for the presentation. My parents live here. I have two older sisters. My parents have a dog here, which has been a great part of being home is getting time with the dog, Lucci. So that's a bit about me. Started to learn how to ride a bike when I was a little bit older than average for folks learning to ride a bike, but this is a photo of my mom and me attempting to teach me how to learn how to ride a bike in Florida. So, getting into why I'm riding cross country, I've ridden about half of the miles on my trip that I've planned out. About a year ago, in mid-January of last year, now that it's 2022, I started thinking about what was going to be next for me after the overland season wrapped up, which is typically in about mid-August. And actually, before I go further, I'll just give you an outline of what to expect from this presentation. So it's chunked out for an hour, but I don't want to take up a whole hour of your time. So the talking should be about 20 to 30 minutes, and then I will open it up for questions from all of you because that's where a lot of the interesting conversations that I've had have come from is questions from outsiders rather than me just saying what I think you want to know. I will talk about what I'm doing and why, and then I've actually compiled a list of some of the most frequently asked questions. So hopefully that will check some of the questions off your list if you have any, and then I'll give it to you guys to go from there. If that sounds good, I'll carry on. So it was cold and snowy in Williamstown, Massachusetts last January. I was looking at something that was very much like this, bleak, but I was thinking about what was going to be next for me. And up until that point, I hadn't given myself an opportunity to kind of sit with having an expanse of time ahead of me to figure out what really I want to do and what would be best for kind of my pathway for the future. So I started to think bigger than just what the next job or source of income would be and gave myself that space. And so because of my time living in Williamstown and other factors, I started thinking about biking and doing something like that. Something akin to this. And this is a photo of one of the original adventure cycling, or what would become the Adventure Cycling Association groups in 1976. So one of the first organized group of cyclists that traveled cross country as part of the Bike Centennial program that ran for a few years, including 1977, where my dad rode cross country when he was just out of college. So this is him, a younger version of him than I am now, if that makes sense. So this is after he's completed the ride. You'll notice he's dumping some water into the ocean. That is Atlantic Ocean water going into the Pacific Ocean, which is pretty neat, and something that I have carried on my own ride. And as I'll explain later, I have yet to dump my small container of Atlantic Ocean water into any other water. It's still safe and sound. So, growing up, I would hear stories from my dad's trip, and it was something that always seemed exciting to me, and something that would be cool to do, but it was almost too big to imagine doing myself, for a variety of reasons. And, without having sort of a natural group or a group of friends that wanted to do something like this, it seemed impossible. And I think a lot of that was just I didn't give myself that space to really plan it out and see if it was possible. But through my time at working at Overland and just experience in life, I definitely grew in my level of confidence in something like this and started to think about what it would look like if I actually tried to make it happen. And that was exciting. And so that's about half of why I started to think seriously about this bike trip. And as I started to think about, what it would look like and how it would feel to be leaving a job with nothing ahead, and nothing really, driving me, I wanted to have something behind what I was doing if I did decide to do this bike ride. So I thought of this organization that is, as I said, closely linked to Overland, Text Less, Live More. So it was founded by the family of an Overland student shortly after a very horrible tragedy happened in 2013 where this family's child, Merritt, was killed on a cross-country bike trip. So riding in a line of bikers, much like the one that you saw in the earlier photo, a distracted driver struck the end of the line and injured several members of the group, including one of the leaders, and Merritt, who later died from injuries in the hospital. So Merritt's family started Text Less, Live More in the years after her death, with the mission of ending distracted driving and promoting digital wellness and the benefits of a life with some time away from screens as well. So again, this is the heavier part of the presentation. It's not all emotional like this, but it is a big reason why I'm doing what I'm doing, so it's important to touch on it from the outset. This is Merritt's group on the first day of the trip. So we saw my dad on his last day of the trip. This is her group on the East Coast, so in Carlson, South Carolina, dipping their wheels before getting going. And this was her shortly before the trip started. So I never knew Merritt personally, but through my work at Overland as both a leader and a member of the full-time office team, I became close with their organization and with Merritt's family as well. And as a growingly avid cyclist, I had stronger ties to their mission and what they're doing. So some facts about distracted driving just to keep in your back pocket, and also just add some gravity to phone use, both on and off the road. I'll let you read through these, but one of the ones that stood out to me is, of course, 9 people getting killed a day is from distracted drivers is a lot. And I think another fact that was pretty wild to me was the amount of time that we'll spend on social media. And so while distracted driving is definitely a large part of the mission, just having the awareness, especially for the younger generations, of what they're doing on their phones versus what they could be doing otherwise is really important. So that is a bit about what got me with the idea percolating about what was going to happen after my time at Overland wrapped up. And then January 31st came, big pivotal moment. I sent this text message. Oh, and by the way, I'll make a shameless plug for the photography in this presentation. They're all my photos, except obviously the ones of the old cyclists and of merit. So if you're wondering where the beautiful photos came from, I did not steal them. So this is the text message that I sent to Marie McGrath, who is the executive director for Text Less, Live More. She's a friend of mine, an overland leader, and a great person generally, and awesome to work with. I just floated this idea of the bike trip to her in partnering with Text Less, Live More, and her excitement gave me the signal that this was the right thing to be doing and moving forward with. So once I had that in mind, I started to think about where I was going to ride. So I took a look at the Adventure Cycling Association's route map. And if you're a cyclist at all or just curious, I would highly encourage you to poke around on this on their website. It's really interesting to see just how big their network is. And it was a little bit overwhelming to look at first, but I had 3 landmarks in mind that I wanted to visit for sure. One was Niagara Falls, a pretty touristy spot that I had never been to, but pretty close to home. Kenyon College, where I went to in Central Ohio, and where my middle sister lives in Portland, Oregon. So those 3 stars on this map kind of led me to this route for the cross country. What I would do for cross country. So kind of a combination of their routes. And I was thinking going down the Pacific coast would be very accessible and right there. I have this chunk of time. It's relatively short compared to the distance of the whole width of the country. So I just added that. And then I was skiing with a friend of mine who's a big bike packer, really enjoys route planning, was telling me about this route that he made for a group that creates cycling clothing. And he designed this route from Jacksonville over to San Diego. And, he's very open to sharing his work and everything. So that's where the idea of going back east, so backwards of his route, came from. And so quickly, what was about a 4,000 mile route turned into this almost 10,000 mile route. Again, I had been cycling for quite a bit, but had never done more than probably 3,000 miles in my whole life. So this 10,000 miles all in one go is kind of this whimsical amount that I couldn't really process. And also the center of the country, I had no idea what it was like. So it was, again, all just sort of like ideas going into motion, and suddenly it was happening. And so then I began to think about what I needed to do to help promote my ride and my mission to the world. And I think a good logo is a good place to start. So I contacted my friend Connor, who had recently begun a graphic design business called Designs by Connor. You should check it out if you are interested. He does things like logos, but his main thing is turning photos into beautiful pieces of graphic art. So we have one in our house, actually, one of our old dog and one of me and my dad on a backpacking trip. And they just turn, a beautiful photo into something that's really interesting, and they're just really great pieces of work. So anyways, started working with him to create a logo based off of this photo that he took of me on one of our bike rides. And he essentially turned this into a silhouette, and then we started experimenting with various elements that would go around it and behind it. So these are some iterations of the logo that we were workshopping. I sent a lot of them to my family to get their feedback. It was kind of a lot, the feedback, but it was all helpful and good. And it led to what it is now. So this is, the logo that I've been using and have on my jersey, and have created stickers and business cards and all of that good stuff. and folks who have made contributions or hosted me along the way have all received or will receive one of these stickers and business cards. And some of them have sent me photos of these stickers in the wild, which is really great. So just a few of them, on water bottles and cars and all of that. So if you'd like one, definitely reach out to me. I'm more than happy to send you one to help spread the good word about distracted driving. So then I needed a bike. And if you've been in the market for a bike in the last couple of years, you'll know that there are a lot of supply chain issues in the world of bikes and almost everything else. So I was checking almost every day on various websites where I could get a used bike or where cyclists were selling their lightly used bikes, because new bikes were almost impossible to find, at least one that would suit my needs. So I was looking on a place called Pink Bike, which is typically a mountain bike online retailer, but I found a bike similar to what I wanted, and was connected with a guy who owns a bike shop in Escondido, California, and he had quite a extensive collection actually of new Kona bikes. So I found a Kona Road, which is a steel sort of gravel touring bike, the 2018 model. Don't really care. I just needed a bike, and it checked most of the boxes that I needed for doing this bike. So this is it. I got it on April 9th, as I listed on that slide there. And shortly after it was built and ready to go, this is it, spick and span, with no miles on it. And it's been a great bike for this ride so far, and fingers crossed for the second half. Then I started to become stressed about the stuff that would go on the bike. Since I had mostly experience with day rides. I'd done a couple overnight tours, but nothing where I was in a place of strong confidence in my gear setup. But over the course of this past summer, I got what I needed, or at least what I thought I needed. And right before the trip, this is what it all looked like. So this is everything essentially that I had for the past 3 months of riding. Some of the things have either fallen off or I got rid of, but most of it is the same. So anything from sleeping and camping equipment. So I have a tent, a sleeping pad, and a sleeping bag all the time, even if I'm not camping. Cycling clothes, so 2 pairs of those, clothes for when I'm off the bike, extra shoes, water, bike repair stuff, all of that is in this photo, and became attached to my bike shortly after, and this is what that looks like. So this was on Cape Cod, literally right before I started riding on August 21st. And again, it looks very much the same now, a little bit more dirt on the bike, but that's what it is. And fundraising is a component of this ride too. The primary goal and the primary way to end distracted driving is through spreading awareness. I'm doing a very small part by having events like this and conversations with folks along the way. But Text Less Live More is doing the heavy lifting. My initial goal for the ride was to raise $1 per mile. So the route was about 10,000 miles, so about $10,000. I was blown away and being able to raise that much before I even started riding. So a few days after starting the trip, I did bump that up to 50,000, and I'm making good progress, and I feel really blessed with the support that I've had. So thank you to all who have contributed. I really appreciate it, and it's super humbling to be where I am in this progress. Okay, so that's the first half of what I wanted to chat about, kind of leading up to the trip and where things are at now in terms of fundraising. So this is a list of the most frequently asked questions from people that I'll meet on the side of the road, the dozens of people that I've talked to since being home, where I have seemingly the same conversation over and over. I love having it, but I figured it'd be worth your while to answer these questions before we go into Q&A, so that we're not repeating questions. So I'll answer these in order here, and we'll see what happens. And then you'll have time for questions afterwards, if there are other ones. So I kind of already answered this in the beginning, why I'm doing this. But to reiterate, is to support Text Less, Live More, which means a lot to me for my experience working at Overland. And yeah, just having a strong belief in their mission of, putting the phone away, certainly while driving, and then also when you're not on the road as well, on all of the benefits associated with it. And then, of course, my dad's bike ride that we've heard countless stories about throughout my childhood growing up. And yeah, and finally feeling like I could give myself the space to do something like that. And the third reason, which I didn't touch on, is for views like this. And you might not have the same reaction I have when I look at this, but when I look at this, it's kind of like my whole body relaxes because of the feeling of expanse and being able to see a road ahead, and then you almost can't see the end of it because it's so vast. And having that space to really think at the pace at which your body wants to, rather than feeling constrained by any sort of time limits or structure, is really good. And I had gotten that on backpacking trips before. So trying to replicate something like that has been a driver behind doing this. Then what do you eat? And Lucy was asking this question before. Oh no, she asked a different one. Never mind. But a lot of people ask, what do you eat? It's really not super complicated, but it is interesting because I didn't really know what I was going to eat before starting this trip, because most of my experience was with backpacking, where you're carrying everything that you have for a week without, seeing a store or something. So this life of bike touring, where you'll probably run into at least a gas station every day and get food that way, is new and an adjustment for sure. So breakfast, very much the same from what I had growing up backpacking, is oatmeal, and that's a staple. I did come to like Belvita biscuits. If you haven't had them, they're really filling and really delicious with a variety of flavors. Put some peanut butter on top, you're good to go, because sometimes a couple packets of oatmeal is just not enough. So that's generally breakfast. If I'm camping, lunch, Subway. If you've been following the ride, you know that I've been going to a lot of different Subways. A friend from Overland, Anya, did a cross-country bike trip working for a cancer nonprofit a number of years ago with 18 other folks. And she told me a few weeks into my ride that they would go to every single Subway they could, and 99% of the time, the Subway would donate all of their lunches. That was a compelling thing to hear. So since then, I've been going to just about every Subway that I've seen. I don't think I hunted them out quite as diligently as she did, but I've had about a 20 or 25% success rate. It's an interesting conversation, but more often than not, I get a teenager where their manager's not there say, my manager's not here and I can't make that decision. And that's kind of where the conversation ends. And that's okay. At least I will have had a conversation with someone about what I'm doing. At the end of the day, I'm not doing this to get free lunches. This is the non-camping breakfast that I tried to seek out. So this was at a diner here, and not a Denny's. I do love Denny's, but this is a good example of the quantity of food that feels good to start a day and carry me to lunchtime. Definitely more than I could probably consume now that I haven't been biking for a few weeks, but it certainly is a great way to start the day with a nice cup of coffee as well. Tons of Cliff Bars, other bars as well, because if you're only eating Cliff Bars, it can become pretty monotonous. But those are a staple and, pretty well available. So yeah, I will definitely try to get some variety in there with different snacks and bars as well. This was the question that Lucy asked. Where do you sleep? So I did a little bit of sifting through my spreadsheet while preparing this, and this is the breakdown of the nights from the first half of the trip. So it was 85 nights on the road. 14 of those were with warm showers hosts. I'll talk about those in a second. 14 nights in hotels. Some of those were back-to-back nights, so it did add up quickly. 21 nights camping. That was less than I anticipated. The weather did decline as I entered the Pacific Northwest, so I was trying to avoid tent camping. And then 36 nights with friends or family connections. So that was definitely surprising to me. I expected to be camping a whole lot more, but I was just blown away by the amount of support that I would get from friends who were following along and would reach out and let me know that, they knew someone or they knew someone who knew someone in the area that I should call. And that was just, it's so cool because, the whole thing is kind of a puzzle that you figure out as you go. And those were always huge bonuses. So thank you to those lovely people. I mentioned warm showers. If you're a cyclist or have gone on a tour, you may know what warm showers is. It's kind of a weird name for an accommodations app for cyclists, but what it is an app sort of like Airbnb, but geared for cyclists. So folks who are willing to host a cyclist on the road in any sort of capacity. It could be you have a space in your yard where you'd be okay with someone setting up a tent, or maybe you have a guest room that's always available and a bathroom that you'd be happy for them to stay in, or maybe you want to do that and cook dinner and breakfast for them. There's a whole range of folks, but they're all on this app and visible through an interface that looks like this. So on the left, you can see the different locations where there are warm showers hosts. And then you can click any of those green pins and send a message to them. So this one on the right is from a message that I sent to my most recent warm showers host just before I stopped riding for the year. But this is my go-to for finding accommodations if I don't have a friend or family connection already. And it's been wildly successful for me. And again, it's just one of the beautiful things about being on the road is you get to see and meet people like this who are just endlessly generous and kind people. So these next few photos will be kind of a range of what those accommodations look like. So the most primitive that I stayed in is what's called dispersed camping. So not really a campground at all, but an area designated for camping. So there'll be like fire rings or whatnot, but really nothing else, no running water or toilets or anything. And this was in Colorado. And this photo will come back in a few slides, but the most basic of camping. Next up from that is a stranger's backyard. So this is Joe King's backyard in Ohio. It was a long day. I really wasn't sure where I was going to stay. I started looking for friendly looking houses. This one had a nice welcome with fall colors on its sign outside the door. So I knocked on it and was met by Joe, who was holding a Keystone Light, absolutely friendly and super welcoming. He was kind of like, I don't care if you camp here, and let me stay in the backyard. He ended up coming out of his house while I was eating dinner, had some great conversation. One thing about him, he loves sunsets. So I watched the sunset with him, and he added me on Snapchat in the morning, which was really nice. If I want, I can go look on his Snapchat. Almost every single day he posts a picture of the sunset, and they always look different because of how sunsets work. But it's really cool to have that connection with him, and he checks in every once in a while and asks how I'm doing. So that was definitely a blessing to be met with a stranger like that. Next up, not a great photo of me, but this shows you what a pavilion camping situation might be. So I met these guys, Stephen and Jeff, and we had just crossed the Ohio River into Cave in Rock, Illinois on a little ferry boat. It's about a 5-minute ride, and we shared this pavilion because we were expecting rain that night. And they shared a little bit of their dinner. I was having Subway. You can see a little peek there. And yeah, so this is Jeff and Steven after when we were about to part ways. Great guys. And it's just cool to meet other folks on the road like that. One step up from pavilion camping is this. I don't really know how to explain it, but it's sort of like a one-room cabin, and that's about it. There's outlets and a bed. So I had my sleeping bag. It wasn't insulated. It was pretty cold, but a shelter nonetheless where I didn't need to set up a tent. This is a bunkhouse. It's called the bunkhouse. This was one of my Warm Showers hosts' accommodations. They are two of the most generous and heartwarming people you'll ever meet. They live as many Warm Showers hosts do, they live a pretty humble life, but are just so incredibly generous with their resources that they have. These two particular folks were not cyclists at all, but they had a really horrible accident across the street, like right out of their window, where the garbage guy was taking trash, he had put trash in the back of a garbage truck and then was walking around to the driver's side door to get back in and was clipped by a car, and they were the first responders to that accident, and it left a huge negative mark on their life. And so because they realized how dangerous the road is that they live on, they wanted to give cyclists passing through a safe place to stay. And so they've hosted hundreds of people over the years. So I got to read the guest book and catch up on all of the people that they've been able to support and help over the years. This is a bed in Brandenburg, Kentucky. Again, I don't mean to make this like I'm rating the accommodations that I stay in, but just to give you a sense of the variety of places that I have stayed in on the trip so far. But Troy and Donna were super helpful. They picked me up from where I stopped riding to avoid riding on really dangerous, busy roads on the way to their house. They took me out for lunch, and they had a beautiful husky. And so, stories attached with every place that I have stayed. This probably looks more familiar to everyone. It's a hotel room. Try to limit those stays just because of the financial and lack of interesting story attached with them. But on a cold, rainy day or after a really long day, it is a nice reward to have a shelter and a shower and some privacy. So the next question is, and this is asked it's one of the most frequently asked questions. They all are, but what do you do all the time in your own thoughts? And I had this impression going into the ride too of, what do we do? What do you do on the bike when all you have to do is bike and not like, what are you thinking about? So I think you probably imagine a scene like this where it's just this forever. And there's nothing occupying your brain space. But actually what it ended up being was that I would spend a lot of time thinking about when my next meal would be, when I would take a sip of water next, and what type of bar I would eat next. If I was going up a hill, I would be thinking about the hill and when it would be over and what the downhill might be like. Those are some of the more negative times in my head. it did prevent me from, getting lost in my own thoughts. And then, after eating a snack or after lunch or after going up a big hill, that's when sort of the more Zen moments would happen where I could daydream about, how I'm going to make an interesting post about the day and what sorts of things I wanted to highlight, what I wanted to listen to, things like that. So what I'm trying to say is it's a pretty small portion of the time spent on kind of running circles in my head. There are moments like that, but I think they're actually some of the most positive moments where I get to a point where I'm not hungry, my legs feel good, and everything is going right, where I can have the headspace to really sort of meditate and be in my own thoughts, and it's not really a negative time, as people might think. Do I listen to music or podcasts? Yes, but never with headphones. So I don't necessarily agree with headphones while bike riding. People can do whatever they want. I personally don't feel comfortable having anything in my ears. And I tried having one in on a rail trail, and the wind, I couldn't hear anything. So I quickly abandoned that idea. But what I found is that I have a mount for my phone that allows me to attach it to the handlebars. So that little black thing, I can't point to it, I don't think, but it's sort of by the hose there. It's empty because I'm holding my phone. But I can play podcasts and music from that, and since it's pretty close to my face, I can hear it really well and also stay really in tune with the surroundings. So that's that. I tend to start the day with the daily and up first, just to get a sense of what's going on in the news, and then I'll take a break, have some silence, maybe play some music after lunch when the energy dips, and then it does vary based on the day and the weather. Have I ever been scared? Yes, there have been 2 instances where I was truly worried. So we go back to this photo from the dispersed primitive camping. So my tent was in those trees just beyond where my bike is. And I woke up at 3:30 in the morning because the ground was moving and I was dreaming in deep sleep. And so it took me a few seconds to realize that and remember that I was totally on my own, and the ground was moving because of someone other than me. And I heard grunting and quickly realized that it was a bear going right next to my tent. Fortunately, it walked right past me. I got out of my tent with my bear spray and headlight and heard it splash into the water. There's a little watering hole just beyond on the lighter patch there. And I never saw it. I stood outside for about 20 minutes waiting for it to come back and make sure that it wouldn't affect my stuff or anything. But I never heard it again. So I had to go back in my tent without knowing where it went, and did manage to go back to sleep. But 3 hours later at 6:30, the same thing happened again. And it was still dark, not light yet. And I did the same thing and didn't see it. It went into the water. I'm not totally sure what happened, but I was scared. But it was fine. My food was away. Scouts taught me well for all of that. So that was one moment. And that morning actually turned into a great day. This is my friend Riley, also an overland leader. He is a champ. He had just finished about a 2,000-mile ride in the mountains, 9:30 the night before. Got in his car from the town nearby that he lives in, very convenient, but he got in his car at 8 or so and met me where I was camping with coffee and a smile and rode with me up to the high point of the trip after all that he had done, and then rode back. We went our separate ways at the top. But rock star guy, and I am so grateful for him for doing that. It was really fun to have someone on that. The second time that I was worried was, again, coming back to this nice cabin accommodation. Looks like a beautiful day. It was a beautiful morning. Still looks beautiful. This is an hour or so after leaving that place. You'll notice there's some snow in the trees, and it looks a little misty up there, and I am going that direction. going up. Generally, the weather doesn't improve as you go up. And I was going up Wolf Creek Pass, and this is what it looked like on top. So it was a whiteout, very cold. It was in the teens. A few minutes after taking this photo, I went into the vault toilet that was at the top because there's a campground up there. So it was a little shelter from the wind. Threw on an extra layer, warmed up my hands, and started going down. And it was freezing, and that was why I was scared.
Ben, if you can hear, the picture froze and we can't hear you.
Hmm.
It's possible that the bear came back.
um, I hope not. Ben, maybe get off and get back on again if you can hear us.
Hello?
Hello, you're back. Yay.
I don't know what happened. Sorry about that.
These things always happen. Don't worry.
Okay. So yes, it's Ohio. I went to school in Ohio, but that's not the reason why it's my favorite state. Early September is, I think, the perfect time of year in a lot of places, or at least in the eastern half of the country. So it was blissful weather, really wide open farm roads like the one you saw, and yeah, just beautiful country and really nice people. I feel like once you get out of the Northeast, the amount of kindness that you see in people is just exponentially greater. The longest day that I've had, this is kind of a hard question to answer, but I tend to answer it objectively in terms of mileage. So I did have one 120-mile day. So I went from Tribune, Kansas into Colorado to Ordway. I wouldn't say this is the hardest day of the trip, but it was the longest. A lot of factors go into what make a day difficult, including wind. Wind was favorable in this day. Weather, terrain. So if it's hilly, I had one day where there was like caked up dirt that I was riding on, and so I couldn't actually turn the wheels. So I ended up having to walk about 5 miles with my bike, and that made it a hard day. But this is the easiest way to answer the question. And this is a photo from that day, just on after passing into Colorado. So nice, wide open still, and just knowing that the Rockies were beyond that somewhere was really exciting and kept me going. Am I keeping a blog? Sort of. I put daily updates on Strava. So I record my rides on Strava, which is it's an app for it records any sort of physical activity. So that could be cycling, hiking, swimming, yoga, anything like that. And it's sort of like a social network in that way, where you have a feed of people that you follow. If you're interested, my mom made a Strava account with no intention of ever recording a physical activity on it, but she's able to see my posts. But I do a somewhat extensive write-up on each day, including some highlights, and then a high point, low point, something I'm looking forward to, and a cheers to someone from the day. And I post the same text information, but fewer photos on Instagram, and do a sort of video, a vlog on Instagram each day there. So if you're interested, check those out. They're also available on my website. You can access them easily through there, so you don't need to scramble to write anything down. Favorite part of the trip, and I'll move somewhat quickly because time is moving faster than I thought, are the people.
Take your time.
Okay. These are some of the people that I've had the opportunity to see and meet along the way. This is, what, 35 photos. I had about double this that I wanted to put in, but didn't want them to be too small. But just a sample of, the experience that getting out there and seeing people has, and getting to experience their kindness. So definitely the people. So we'll go back to this day. That was pretty snowy. I mentioned that I couldn't brake. So I did stop a couple of times to warm up my hands. But it was about a 14-mile descent in mostly this type of weather. It would get a little warmer further down, but for the most part, it was freezing. And as you're going downhill, you're not generating any heat. So any temperature increase was negligible on the hand warming factor. So I went into my risk management brain, which I credit a lot to my time in scouting and overland. I stopped riding while I could definitely brake, and just pulled over. Fortunately, there was a lot of traffic on the road, for at least relative to what I was expecting. And I waved down the first person that passed or that was going down. And this lovely family picked me up and stopped. I didn't really process how amazing it was that the first car that I waved down stopped. Maybe it was the weather, hard to say. But they were headed towards Salt Lake City to do some shopping and gambling, so it wasn't really off their route. They dropped me off in Camas, Utah. And then I carried on to Park City that day. It was pretty challenging to accept that I had taken, a 15-mile gap on the route. But one of my previous Warm Showers hosts actually commented on my Strava post that day and put it into perspective well by saying, if you divide the 15 miles by the total amount of the route, 15 miles is next to nothing. So that did help, and safety was definitely the priority in that moment. The next example of people, and there's so many examples, and that was part of the challenge of putting this presentation together, actually, is, I could go on forever just talking about all the different nooks and crannies of what this experience has been like so far. So I'm just highlighting a few of the people in this. But this was, I think, one of my favorite days of the trip, was in Brothers, Oregon. If you've heard of it, I'm surprised. It looks like this. This is one side of the road, and then there's this tiny school on the other side of the road. There's a couple of vault toilets behind this, and that's really it. So it's it used to be a stage stop a while ago, and there's really nothing between. Bend is the next city, and then I forget what the next one is, but there's essentially 100 or so miles with nothing. So this was sort of like a little needle in the haystack of goodness. So I was trying to figure out my miles to get to Bend. This location was actually perfect, but I was a little worried about where I would stay and if they had any resources. So I called the Brothers School the night or the afternoon before doing this ride, and the secretary there, Cindy, said I could camp by their playground and they would leave out a jug of water because there's no running water outside. With the condition being that I would have to be out of there by 8 in the morning. Now, 8 in the morning doesn't sound too early with the daylight and how things are going, and my tendency to get going on the somewhat later side of things. That was a little aggressive, but I was glad to have a place to stay and can make that happen. And they reminded me of the 8 a.m. departure request on the jug of water. So this I took right before I was going to head out at 8. But right as I was getting ready to go, Miss Stack and Cindy came out. They were getting ready for the school day, and invited me in, actually, and offered coffee, water, a bathroom. and even breakfast, because they provide breakfast for these kiddos that go here because they come from all over and they may not have had time for breakfast that day. So what I thought was going to be a rushed exit ended up being a really relaxing and homey feel, and getting to chat with them. And they actually let me stay for their morning routine. So the kiddos arrived. I was just kind of there. They're like, "Oh, don't worry. This is just Ben. We'll introduce him later." And we did the Pledge of Allegiance together. They do a minute of physical activity after the Pledge of Allegiance. So without being prompted or anything, they took their heart off their chest and then started doing jumping jacks and push-ups. And so I did like the only push-ups I had done in months, which was pretty painful, but cool to be doing that with these, elementary school kiddos. And then, they did devote a portion of their morning to let me share my ride. So here's a picture. They unrolled the old map. Who knows if those are in most of the schools nowadays? I have no idea, but it was cool to see one because it was just like when I was in elementary school. They gave me a pointer, and they were just kind of watching as I pointed along. These kids have never been to a city or any sort of big town. Like, they may not have even ever been to Bend, Oregon. So who knows what registered or anything. It was just cool to share that with them. And then my favorite part was they introduced themselves to me and shared a bit of their background. So these kiddos are coming from ranching families primarily. So they're riding horses, feeding chickens, checking predator traps. I didn't even know those existed, to see if there's a dead coyote or a rabbit in there. And a couple of them even drive sheep trucks, and they're less than 10 years old. But they live on these massive properties, and their parents teach them how to do it. So it's really cool to hear about their experiences, and you could just hear in their voices their sense of pride for the place that they come from. And that was really, really powerful to experience. So this is the 6 of them. Miss Stack and Cindy come in every day for those 4 kiddos. It's pretty awesome. Noah, the only boy there, he, when I was leaving, got up and shook my hand. And I don't know if you've met an elementary school student before, but I haven't ever met someone that age who had the courage and maturity to shake someone's hand. And it was an incredible handshake too. So just, having that feeling that it was a really cool mutual connection that we all had, and getting to experience that was really cool. And they sent me a Christmas card, and they all signed it, which was really sweet. So those people mean a lot to me, and I'm grateful for that experience. The final example I'll have, and we're almost done. Hope everyone's awake. This is Raymond, Washington. So I had a front brake challenge at the end of this first half of the trip, where basically the brake pads had totally worn down because of rain and grit, and there was also a piece missing from the brake. I won't go into the details, but essentially I got to a point where I couldn't safely ride my bike any further, and I was in Raymond, Washington, a pretty remote place. And so I sat myself down in a cafe, started calling bike shops to see if they had the part that I needed. The closest one was in Seaside, Oregon, which was very close to my end destination for the entire first half of the trip. I was supposed to be there the next day. Disappointing to know that I would have to go via car to where I was supposed to stop to get a part, but I didn't even know how. So I messaged all of the local warm showers hosts through that map that I showed earlier, to get some feelers out to see if anyone could possibly drive me. And well, first I want to put into perspective how close I was to reaching the Pacific Ocean, which is why I haven't dumped my little container of ocean water. But if you zoom out, it's very close, but I still haven't made it. But so through those contacts at Warm Showers, there was one host whose partner was willing to drive 30 minutes east to pick me up, and then the 90 minutes west and then south to Seaside, and then back to get me the part that I needed for my bike, after about 5 minutes of going back and forth on messaging with them. And that is humbling and incredible, and just kind of speaks to the level of generosity that there is for folks out there, and that there is a lot of good in this country and the world generally. So what ended up happening was, they drove me. This is Estefan and Hugh. They drove me to Seaside. The bike shop had the part that I needed, but it wasn't working. Basically, I couldn't ride. So I decided I would just stay in Seaside and make my way to Portland the next day. And they just went back up to their home afterwards. But they were super gracious and helpful and incredible humans. And it's, again, this is a drop in the bucket from the generosity that I've experienced so far. Final point, sort of, is rainbows. And this just kind of ties everything back to merit and why I'm doing what I'm doing. The Leviton family, before I left, told me about the meaning of rainbows, and that, going across country, you're bound to see at least a few rainbows. And whenever you do, to know that merit is there, and to think of her, because she is with you in those moments. And so this was the first rainbow that I saw on the trip at Niagara Falls. There's a lot of rainbows there, so that was kind of cool. So just bringing it back to that point. So next, in 2 weeks, almost exactly 2 weeks, I will be starting riding again. Going down the Pacific coast from where I left off in Raymond. And then once I hit San Diego, I'll be going east to Jacksonville, Florida. And I'm not promising this to anyone, but I'm hoping my legs are in good enough shape to ride up the East Coast after that, so that I don't have to buy a plane ticket home. So January 17th, and that's all I have. Oh, it's 8 o'clock.
That's all right. No problem. That was fascinating. I'm sure there are lots of questions. So we can look at the chat. Let's see. What does the chat have to say? Can you see it, Ben, or should I just read it to you?
I just got to pull it up.
18-degree freeze. Yikes.
Yeah, let me know if you see any.
All right, can you see it?
Yes, I'm just seeing if there's. Did he say Velveeta biscuits? No, maybe Velveeta.
Okay.
Oh yeah, it is corrected. Okay, great.
It could not be Velveeta. We knew that. You need to give everyone your contact info if you didn't already. I forget.
Yes. Should I put that in the chat, you think?
Yes.
Okay. It's on my website as well. Oh, wait.
Okay.
There's my email. I can give my phone number too if people want.
Oh, your email's probably good.
Okay. That does seem a little excessive.
All right. Did you see the chat about bike looks cool but looks like limited gearing, i.e. single chaining in front?
Yes.
Ring.
So that was a point of contention in my decision. So they're asking about it's called a one by. So there's, the chain ring in the front by the pedals, and then there's the bunch of smaller ones in the back, and usually there's 2 or even 3 on the front. But I went with 1 in the front, but they're big gears in the back. So the combination of those 2 have been doable and easy enough for the hills that I've been on. The reason why I went with that was because there's fewer moving parts. So there's 1 less derailleur in the front. So it's fewer things that can go wrong. Yeah.
Smart.
Someone asked my favorite Cliff Bar flavor. That is Cool Mint Chocolate. It tastes like a Thin Mint, and it has caffeine. I don't know if I can't tell if there's caffeine in it, but it's very good.
Do you think pack weight on the front of your bike is better than on the rear of the bike?
It's good to have balance. You certainly don't want more in the front than in the back. But if it's balanced, you'll be able to ride a lot more efficiently, and you'll also have less wear on your back tire. They'll wear evenly, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Ben, are you going to speak to young people at the schools and to new drivers?
That's my hope. So I've been working with the folks at Text Less Live More for the whole ride, but I'm hoping to have a better sense of where I'll be and when, and be able to have more specific dates for schools. They have a number of different Text Less Live More chapters across the country, in particular on the California coast. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to line up one or two, maybe in San Francisco and the LA area, but hopefully more. I think those are really important, and just having experiences like I did at the Brothers School were also really cool. So,
lots of words of praise. Oh, Dan, they would like to know what you do if you pull a muscle.
that's a good question. Rest is important. I haven't pulled a muscle, fortunately. I have been dealing with some knee pain. So I think just stretching and being diligent about warming up, which is very challenging to do on a trip like this, is important. And yeah, just listening to your body and knowing when to take a shorter day if necessary, or even a day off, to keep things going smoothly.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Did you take advantage of bike trails along the way? And if so, which ones?
Yes, that's a great question. So I was on bike trails whenever possible. Another reason why I loved Ohio is because they have some of the best bike path networks in the country. So I think it was for about half of the whole state of Ohio, I was on bike paths, so no cars. A lot of those went through Amish country, which was really cool. So you'd be on a bike path with an Amish buggy. So that was pretty fun. But yeah, there's bike paths all over. Buffalo, I like to highlight as having, I mean, that's a city, obviously, but they have some of the best bike lanes that I've seen, where there's actually a physical barrier between the car ways and the bike lane. But yeah.
And why a saddlebag and not, is it panniers or panniers?
You could say panniers. I think most people say panniers. So I went with that setup because I had planned to be on the Great Divide mountain bike route for a while. So essentially from when I got to Colorado Springs, Colorado, up, I was supposed to go to through Wyoming and Montana, and then head west from there. And I wanted to be on a setup that is more suited for off-roading. But because of the cold weather and that run-in with the bear didn't help. But I didn't end up going on that route for much. So it does force you to pack less. With panniers, you can hold so much stuff. And my dad's told me how much stuff he ended up shipping home with his panniers that he ended up not needing. But you can, people can have upwards of 125 pounds in their whole setup with panniers, but mine, I'm at like 75 maximum, and I can't, unless I strap stuff to random places, I can't really get much more on there.
And there are many thanks to you. Good luck on the second act. How do you deal with mean dogs?
Mean dogs, I saw that came in. So yes, I've heard there's a lot of different tips and tricks that I received for dealing with dogs. There's bike faster, there's kicking, there's carrying sticks, and getting off of your bike and stopping, which I've actually found to be the most effective. Dogs are, they just naturally want to sprint after anything that's moving. And so if you keep pedaling faster, they're going to keep running after you. But I've found they actually get totally freaked out if you stop suddenly and then get off your bike. They'll turn around the other way immediately. And that puts you in an advantage because you can actually have your bike between you and the dog, and have this wall where they can't really get through. So that's what I've resorted to in all situations now. But I was definitely figuring it out in Kentucky in particular.
Okay, and here's just a suggestion. Have you considered corporate speaking engagements? Because more people need to be reminded about the good in the world. Might be worthwhile. Just a suggestion from somebody.
Thank you.
How many flats during the trip, and did you gain or lose weight during the trip?
I think I'll start with the flats, I guess. I think I've gone through 7 or 8 tubes. Um, I had a couple instances where I had 2 flats in the same day, which just meant that I didn't get all of the flat causing things out of the tire. I think just because I was on the side of the road and didn't have the time to really, when you take off the tire and make sure you feel around to make sure that there's nothing sticking out that could cause another flat. So I would say 7. But I had about a 4,000-mile window, so the majority of the trip where I didn't have a single flat, and then I had a couple on both ends of that. I don't think I lost weight in the beginning a little bit, but I had lost so much weight from doing nothing this summer because work was so busy that there wasn't much to lose, and then I kind of maybe lost a little more upper body weight, but gained some in my legs. I don't really know, but it kind of came out in the wash.
Yeah, so you weren't weighing yourself on your trip.
Not really.
Okay, if you want to speak in schools, consider connecting with the PTAs. Piece of advice. Angela would like to know if you've tried to get corporate funding from any of the companies of the products you've been using and have shown in your presentation. Subway and Cliff Bars might be good contenders. What do you think?
Yeah, I did send an email to Subway early on. I never heard back from them. The tricky thing with them is all of their franchise locations are independently owned and operated. So as a corporation, they can't really provide much at the individual stores. But I might venture out and contact them again. Cliff Bars would be a good one to reach out to, though.
Definitely. And there are many other comments praising you and supporting you. Attaboy, Ben, proud of you and excited to follow your second leg. What did you find more difficult to manage or overcome, the physical or the mental challenges?
That's a good question. I think the mental challenges are certainly harder. I think I was blessed with incredible weather until I got to Colorado, where I had the time to have beautiful sunny skies to build up the physical endurance and ability. So by the time I got to the bad weather, it wasn't so much my legs that were the problem, but dealing with nonstop rain for 7 or 8 hours. It was challenging. So definitely the mental ones, and the Northwest sticks out in my head as the main source of challenges.
That's kind of surprising. Well, maybe you could come back and tell us about the rest of your trip when you're done.
I'd love to. Yeah, be happy to.
Great.
Yeah, because much of this next leg, with the exception of California, I haven't seen ever before. So, that was true with part of the first leg, but the South and Texas, I haven't spent any time there. So.
Oh, and one thing we never even asked about was the COVID through the whole thing, but that's probably an essay.
Yeah, it's a good question. So as I was planning this trip, mask mandates were being lifted over the summer and things were kind of chilling out in terms of COVID. So that wasn't even on my mind as I was planning it. And then into the start of the trip, things were still pretty mellow, and the good weather, longer days helped. And then I got into the middle of the country where people didn't really mind or care about the pandemic very much. So I didn't really see tons of mask wearing or any questions about vaccination status or anything until I got to Oregon. I did, my warm showers hosts often wanted or required guests to be vaccinated, which was good. But there wasn't much in my day to day that I was thinking about until I got to Oregon. And then it was, the first subway that I went to in Oregon was like you couldn't sit inside and everyone was wearing masks. So it was a bit of a like jolt back to reality. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things are for this second leg with the recent spike, and hopefully it doesn't cause too many rifts.
No. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and thank you very much, Ben. This was so interesting. So get in touch with me when you get back, and we'll hear how it went.
Thanks so much for having me, and thank you everyone for sticking around this long. I apologize that it's longer than what we set out, but I appreciate you sticking around a lot.